Hello and welcome to BetterTech. I'm your host, Colin McCarthy, and I've seen firsthand how technology transforms business. And at BetterTech, we're here to explore the dynamic world of tech with you. So let's start today with a guest who really knows the intersection of technology and business. Matt, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to BetterTech. So let's start off today's episode with your introduction, what you've been doing, your job, and then we'll move on from there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Colin, for having me on. My job, I can start there. That's pretty easy. I work for Xactly. We're an intelligent revenue platform. We've got some innovation built on top of some AI. And, we're the market leader and have been doing this for basically invented the space and have been leading the space for the last 20 years. I joined recently in the last 6 months or so and have been maturing the cybersecurity program for the company. And then prior to, you said, prior to this, I worked for a company that moved people to the cloud and a couple of cybersecurity consultancies and Crocs the shoe company. So have been around the cyber game for quite a while.
Right. So what have you seen change in the cybersecurity landscape over the years, and through all of your business experience? Why is it so crucial for businesses to adapt their cybersecurity strategy?
Okay, so what have I seen change? I mean, I think I go back to 1983, Matthew Broderick in War Games, and I think you saw war dialing from modems and everybody talking about cybersecurity. The two keywords would be the mainframe and the firewall. So obviously, since then, we've seen quite an evolution. The disciplines have splintered and splintered and splintered again and become very granular. So I think by 2013, I was managing a portfolio in NorCal and SoCal, Denver, Dallas, and Omaha for a cyber consultancy. And we had 10 different disciplines with over 52 different service offerings. And, fast forward another 10 years, and here we are confronting the diversity in tech across 4 or 5 different public clouds and the onslaught of AI innovation. So I think quite a bit has changed. Yeah. I mean, my career path is not even make sense in today's world. So when we have mentoring conversations with the youngsters coming up, the discussion is obviously much more nuanced than learn a little bit of tech and raise your hand when someone says security. So, yeah.
Right. Do you think that broad background is a benefit?
Yeah, I think being well-rounded certainly makes sense. I mean, at some point in 2010, I did a round the world trip, did 22 countries in 15 months, and I wrote a handful of blogs on things like how travel makes better executives, IT executives. And certainly, I think having a diverse exposure to a broad set of topics and being able to be conversant with folks from different disciplines is valuable. And for me, that started in IT and obviously expanded, getting broader exposure in the business as my career went on. So.
Right. And it's great to hear you reference War Games. That is a classic film that I got to rewatch recently on a flight back from the Jamf conference this summer. Jamf had Jamf User Nation conference had a lot of focus on security, and there I was, on the way back watching, one of the first big initial sort of hacking films, and it is very interesting how we used to do security, or how we didn't even think about security in those days. As a personal story, when I first started doing IT support, I was doing telephone support for CompuServe. We used to telnet into a CompuServe public IP address, log in with our plain text credentials to get access to the database for all of the user details. And
Yeah.
all of those user details had, billing address, credit card information, everything else that you needed to help them administer their account.
While just a contrast, right? You think about the regulatory environment and boom and data and obviously encryption and all the rest, just kind of crazy. And Jamf, another great company, obviously in the Vista portfolio. So excited to hear the support for Jamf. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously you've been in your role as CISO. CISO is your title.
That's right. Yep.
Right. for about 6 months, it seems. From your experience, what are the common challenges that organizations face when trying to align their cybersecurity initiatives with their overall business goals? And obviously, this is great to hear your experience because you're a relatively new hire and a senior important hire in an existing business. How do you align your cybersecurity initiatives with the current business goals?
When you frame the question, the first thing that pops into my mind is like wartime CEOs versus peacetime CEOs, right? So we've seen just more broadly the economic environment has shifted quite dramatically in the last, let's say, 18 months, right? Where it was growth at all costs, and we saw these extravagant valuations, and it just made a ton of sense to capture as much. It was a land grab for revenue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we've seen a huge compression, in particular in the SaaS industry, on multiples over the last few years. That's obviously driven a focus on EBITDA, and so when you think about building a cybersecurity program, and some of the goals are shifting from revenue at all costs to how do we do this in a cost-effective and very efficient way. You have changing dynamic inside of a business, and you need to contemplate that as you develop staffing strategies, as you pick your technologies, as you partner with other stakeholders in the business.
Right. And do you have any sort of specifics you could walk us through the process of aligning cybersecurity initiatives with those business goals? What sort of key steps should organizations be taking?
Certainly, we talk about in the book understanding at the highest level, who are your investors? Where are you at in the fund? Where are you at in the investment? I think understanding what the exit strategy might look like. Are you going to a strategic, or are you potentially going to IPO? I think all of those things certainly play a meaningful, have a significant impact. I think the industry and the type of, like, if you're a publicly traded, the stock that you are you a cyclical stock? Are you a growth stock? Will have an impact on where you're focusing in the business. Understanding the segments. So when you're in the room with a group of executives, apologize for that, you're going to have to understand, where are the investments? What does the growth look like? What is the cash cow? How are you funding the business? Are you raising capital through debt or equity? All of those things play a significant role because you have to couch stories for investments in the same storylines that the rest of the business is talking about. So if you want to secure funding in order to grow a security operations center, you need to talk about what's happening in the business. And so, yeah, so I think definitely the economic cycle, who's your investor, and then obviously there are some specifics about the way that your business is going to perform or behave. So certainly, if you look at the big guys that have been in the news recently, Clorox is hiring a new CISO. Clorox's business is going to behave as a consumer products company very differently
Mm-hmm.
than DM, for example, or differently than Okta. And so I think, yeah, background, economic cycle, evaluation, I think is critical. If you don't understand what the investment team means when they say, how do you drive value? Then it's you have slim to no chance of describing the initiatives and the impact that you're having on the business in the right way.
Right, right. Yeah, it's you're right to call out, each industry is going to have its own focus, way of doing things, its own priority, based on its funding or its financial status, whether it's publicly owned, private equity, venture capital investment, etc. I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it. There has been less of a divide in the last few years between IT, which seemed to be originally siloed and locked away behind the data center door or an office door. And they seem to be very much aligned or more part of company operations, are very much part of the team.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I think the place where I think it's most observable is are starting to see, and Bob Zukas does a good job of this in his digital directors network, highlighting folks like Mattel and others who are coming forward with cyber, but not just cyber, also like digital committees to pay attention at the point where the core value of your business that's being delivered is on top of technology. The board needs to properly structure and think about, the systemic risk and upside. So yeah, I think we're starting to see much more, call it cyber diversity or I forget the term Bob uses, but
Do you have any helpful hints or tips about how organizations can ensure their cybersecurity strategy is integrated with the business strategy? And as we mentioned before, not sort of separate, and very much part of the team.
I think, when you think about board level governance, board is focused on hiring a CEO at the onset. That's their sort of key strategic influence factor. And then once that's in place, then you're focused on strategy. I think similarly, bringing in a cybersecurity leader that's going to be able to actively participate. If you're hiring a cyber leader and you don't feel comfortable putting them into the executive conversation, then you either have narrowly focused your opinion on what you think cyber is, or you've got the wrong guy or gal, right?
Mhm.
And so I think starting with the right talent at the top, similar to the CEO role, is crucial in the cybersecurity world. And there are a handful of folks that do a particularly great job in helping companies who have not gone through the hiring cycle put the right requirements in place, and also think about who should this person report to and how should we structure that. In my last role, I reported to the CEO. In this role, I reported to our CFO.
Mhm.
Um, this company is a bit bigger than the last one was. So, but yeah, I feel like my voice carries, and I certainly have the opportunity to report to the executive team, the board.
Right. It is always interesting where the head of IT or the head of security reports into. When I worked for a large organization, I did historically for most of my career, report in to somebody in finance, the finance director, local CFO in North America, then the global CFO. Because IT generally, in my experience, and I'm sure yours is the same, we generally know what we need to do, and all we need to do is ask money to be able to, activate or action our projects. Is that the same for you?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is and it isn't. It's interesting you make that comment. I think back to a conference that I was at recently for KeyBanc Capital Markets, and they talked about how the big boom in AI is coming, and how the experience that many investors have had with ChatGPT and with natural language part of AI has really freed up dollars for a lot of companies, and given them the ability to invest in these machine learning initiatives that they wanted to invest in
Hmm.
all along. But because they had failed to articulate well the value of those initiatives, they didn't have the funding. And so, despite Gen AI being like the headline, actually a lot of the dollars are being funneled into more basic machine learning investments. And so I think you're right that a lot of IT folks probably have a good sense for what needs to be done. And in many cases, CIOs and CTOs around the country know, but they, just like we in cybersecurity, have struggled with articulating the business value and securing the funding. When you contemplate it from the CEO perspective, I think it makes sense. Like no business has all the resources that they need. And there will always be more good ideas than resources available. And so I think that scarcity problem drives the complexity.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you mention AI and the costs. Obviously, running AI and doing machine learning on your own costs money, cost cloud resources, buying Gen AI or a Duet AI or um, Copilot licenses. That's Google Workspace or Microsoft licenses or anything else costs an additional license fee. So there is a lot of investment to be made for and to be considered. When, as you mentioned, there's never enough budget to do everything you need. Do you have any best practices for fostering collaboration across all of the business in getting those cybersecurity projects prioritized and executed?
Gosh, I mean, I think there's a couple of ways to really wield influence. I think Malcolm Harkins, over the many years, former CISO of Intel, has really set a framework or a groundwork for some of the thinking that I have. Um, and so uh, tell me the question again. I had this really great thought, super insightful. I forgot what the question was.
You were saying that there isn't enough budget to do everything that you would ever want to do. So, do you have any best practices for building support for those projects and being able to prioritize the cybersecurity ones that you need to get done?
Yeah, so Malcolm talks about budgets, bureaucracies, and behaviors. And I think he talks about the internal battlefield and the external battlefield. And I think it's really insightful. In order to perform well on the external battlefield, you have to perform well first on the internal battlefield. And so I think there's a number of different ways that folks can secure budgets. I think expanding the pie by participating in conversations with other departments is a great way. So, for example, I don't have to hire 10 devs on my team to be successful in building a security data lake, but I do need to know that in a pinch, I can reach out to my engineering counterparts and get them to support certain use cases. Or I don't have to be the person that forces an investment in a training platform if I can build on top of the Cornerstone on-demand investment that my HR team is making already. And so I think there's really good opportunities for us to expand the pie by partnering with other parts of the business. And in some cases, even capturing some of their budget and taking on responsibility for initiatives that maybe they don't want to or can't take on themselves. I think the other thing is so often we're so focused on owning and controlling the resources. And if you do a good job in choice architecture and you do a good job in influencing outcomes through others, you can actually get a lot done with partial FTEs that don't report to you directly. But I think that requires strong partnership and clear responsibilities and powerful competence in the art of influence, if you will.
Right. Yeah. I'm always reminded by people saying that security and cybersecurity is a team sport. And it is those partnerships between everybody within the business and that open communication and collaboration. And I hate it when I hear and talk to people that are in very sort of siloed organizations. It's like, oh, we only do this, and if you want to ask about that, you've got to go and speak to another department. I think in IT and security, everybody needs to be operating and pushing in the same direction, running in the same direction, rather than all going with their own initiatives. Because yeah, then you end up with holes, you end up with duplication, you get up with those siloed applications. You don't get that cross departmental integration and collaboration happening.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think like for cyber pros, we just follow the foundation that's been put in place. Gene Kim and Jez Humble and John Willis and others who have done a lot of writing on Phoenix Project and I forget the one that came after that and the DevOps Handbook and a handful of other things. Like they've basically framed up the run book, right? You create these smaller, more efficient, highly collaborative teams, and you have shared outcomes, and I think you can get a lot done. And then if you pay attention to how folks like Amazon have taken that concept and managed to scale it into a multi-billion-dollar company, I think we just need to find the right way to sort of participate in that conversation. So
Yeah, yeah. Thinking about finance and getting budget for your projects, CFOs and leadership always like to know what is this project going to do for us? So, what are sort of the key metrics that organizations should use to measure success in cybersecurity when they're aligning it to their business needs?
it's loaded. I mean, it's certainly loaded because in my last role, I had an opportunity to play a more prominent role in the revenue producing side of things. So I said protect the brand, accelerate sales, and influence the product. Those were the things that I was focused on. It's not dramatically different in my role at Xactly, but we're not as prominent in the sales cycle as perhaps I was in my last role. So I think it really does have a lot to do with, what are your sales channels? Are you selling through channels? Do you have an alliances program? What opportunity is there for you to have a voice in the industry to help differentiate your product and offerings? Like as the dominant player in our space, certainly we have bigger budgets and we have the opportunity to invest in cyber in ways that our competitors don't. And I think that we should take credit for that and certainly have a concise story. I think like I mentioned, there are other ways to create opportunities to collaborate with other folks, and like the shift from revenue at all costs to an EBITDA focused environment gives you an ability to find ways to capitalize on more efficient operations in order to produce higher EBITDA. I'll give you an example. Having your data retention policy tightly aligned with the actual needs of your business and making sure that you're destroying data can have a very powerful impact. I've used that more than once. Or talking more specifically about tech debt, driving tech debt, which is slowing down the pace of innovation in order to also at the same time eliminate cybersecurity risk inside the environment, makes a ton of sense. So those are a couple of off the cuff, probably pretty applicable to most businesses.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned tech debt. I've seen that, kill companies. If they just spend too much time keeping an old product running and they don't have any resources to innovate, and more nimble companies come along and take their market share away from them, it can really be the death, quite quickly, the death of a company.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy because when you think about like the S&P 500, or you look back, over the last 10 years, 50% of that population of companies has disappeared. They're no longer even relevant. Like they've even been disrupted to the point where they've gone out of business, or they've been purchased or merged or dissolved. And I think at that rate, 50% of formerly global leaders in the business world being completely extinct gives you reason for pause. And certainly the commentary about compressed Moore's law in the face of AI going from whatever it was, 18 months down to 3 months, should make a handful of folks very uncomfortable sitting in plush, cushy positions without an ability to drive forward organizational learning and to through innovative solutions.
Right. Yeah. So as we look to the future, if apart from AI, what emerging trends or technologies do you think will play a significant role in the relationship between cybersecurity and business strategy?
Well, I mean, so if I think about the active conversations that are out there today, the SEC has clearly taken a different stance on cybersecurity than has been previously the case. And this has done two things. One, it's put cybersecurity leaders on notice, and it's given us, I would say, a much more clear set of boundaries. And I think it's also increased the degree of personal liability for cybersecurity leaders, in particular in publicly traded companies. But we expect that to filter down into privately funded companies as well. I think that cybersecurity will take a more prominent role inside the boardroom. I don't know that the NACD has taken the right stance here. I think they've said that they can educate people that have been in the boardroom probably for too long on cybersecurity, and I think that's probably not the right way to go. I think you need to add a cybersecurity expert, just like before SOX, there were no, financial expertise was not required in the boardroom, which is, totally mind blowing, right? And then they had to do disclosures on financial competence in order for folks to participate in the boardroom. And lo and behold, that obviously put a big shift in focus. And most of the people that have ended up in the boardroom over the last 20 or 30 years have been CFOs and CEOs, which is not a bad thing, but certainly the changes from a regulatory perspective shifted the way that the entire industry behaves. Uh,
Right. When you early a few minutes ago, you mentioned SEC and their regulatory stuff. Are you referring to SolarWinds and that case?
Well, there's a couple of cases that will help set precedent, and I think there's emerging uh, disclosure rules that have just gone into place earlier this month. And so I think the combination of both of those things, the Uber case with Joe Sullivan, the SolarWinds case with Tim Brown, and also the emerging disclosure rules, all of those things combined will set the table for what's to come probably in the next, 3 to 5 years. So
Right. The disclosure rules, is it 3 or 5 working days? A company must notify that they've been compromised.
yeah, I think that the compressed timelines and the challenge of doing an appropriate disclosure, like what's too little disclosure, what's too much disclosure, how do you determine materiality in the first place? Uh, I think that all of those conversations are coming to bear, right? So cybersecurity leaders don't necessarily always have influence or sway on what are the proxy statements and the key financial reporting disclosures that are going out into the public in the first place. So I think lots of changes that are changing who's in the conversation, how does that conversation get held, how comfortable are you signing your SOC to or your PCI attestation or whatever those are, because those are now public disclosures
Hmm.
of a particular stance respective to, like, it's your signal to the industry and to the marketplace about what's the current state of your cybersecurity program. And if behind closed doors, you're saying we have all kinds of issues, which is allegedly the case in the SolarWinds, I think it's going to cause a lot of people to pause and hesitate. And then I think, we've also seen a number of executive leaders put on notice, including Target CEO. And there were some other mistakes and obviously some challenges that took place in Canada, business segment and other things. But like, we're seeing CFOs and CEOs feel some of the same pressure that CISOs are feeling, and for better or for worse, I think the way that some of these D&O policies are underwritten, um, the personal liability that cybersecurity leaders have is quite different.
Hmm.
For example, the benefits that others sort of receive under the way that these D&O policies are written. So yeah, lots of change across the board.
Right. Be interesting to see how that progresses as we go into 2024. Lastly, thinking of 2024, is there anything you'd like to share with our audience regarding the intersection of cybersecurity, business strategy, and maybe what they should actually be thinking of and focusing on in the coming year?
I think that the insights that have come from the work that Tim and Joe have done are probably leading the charge. I would be remiss not to just acknowledge that the insights
Mhm.
that I have are their insights. They have been through some challenging litigation. They have tackled some difficult personal issues in the midst of all the chaos that's surrounding them. Having the right governance structures in place, making sure that you have security charter, a properly formed incident response plan, uh, proper limits of liability in your current role. Those are probably at the top of the list. And then I think being able to articulate materiality and leverage cyber risk quantification in order to hold a meaningful disclosure conversation with your information security council or your executive leadership team, and then also to your board. Those are all going to be probably the most prominent issues that folks face going through the next year. And I think for some people, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think
Yeah.
for other people, it's going to be a little bit of fine tuning and tweaking at the edges. But yeah, I think those are the big moving pieces, the big broad brushstrokes that I would be focused on.
Right, yes, best for everybody to be prepared because what we've learned in this year and previous years that it's not going to get any easier. It's just going to get more and more dangerous for businesses to operate, and cybersecurity is just going to become even more important than it already is as companies focus on their business strategy.
And I think, I mean, you would tie it back to AI again. You just saw Rite Aid, right? You've got more than just cybersecurity and compliance now. You've got ethics falling into that mix, and you've got to make sure that you're taking a responsible approach. Otherwise, like the FTC put an enforcement action against Rite Aid, and if I have this right, they can't leverage AI for the next 5 years, which could be a pretty disruptive impact on the business, right? So that's not a mistake you want to make.
I hadn't seen that story. Oh, I'll have to look in because you would hope that they would be able to use the customer data they have and the improvements in AI to like really help people, certainly with medications or supplements they're taking to, be more reactive to medications that are contraindicated, might have reactions. There's a whole AI can really help in healthcare, I think, with the amount of data that's available. But that's a whole other podcast. So I've appreciated your time here today, Matt, and talking to us about cybersecurity. It's been great chatting with you.
Right on. Likewise, appreciate the opportunity, Colin. Take care.
Thanks. Bye. Thank you, everybody, for joining this episode of BetterTech.